But this list is not our favorite games. It's not the best games, not even good games. Partly it's clickbait to get people in the room, which success, clearly. But these are the games that, as someone who spends a lot of time studying games, they're stuck in my craw. I think about them a lot. They come up in conversations. I reference them when we're doing research. These are games where there's something weird about them, and I'll wake up at night thinking about them. We're going to go through them all pretty quick because I want to make sure I can spend a few minutes on each one. But I want to start with Outlaw. This is an Atari 2600 game. It is actually fantastic. There's a crazy story behind it. It is the recreation of an arcade game called Outlaw, but they are completely different games. The arcade game has a light gun. There was a light gun for the Atari. Turned out they couldn't make a good game for it, so they made this instead. This is a distilled example of a tight, two-player, symmetric, competitive video game sports. This could be one of the earliest games that was suitable to be an esport. This and Pong are equally good. I think this is more fun than Pong. It is easy to find ROMs to play this game. There is a file you can download if you know where to look on the internet. That is every Atari 2600 game ever made, and it's like under a megabyte. All right, Vampire Tag. Vampire Tag is nearly extinct. In the talk I gave a couple days ago, or yesterday, we talked about how there are games that are going extinct. There are games that are endangered. The Vampire Tag requires one of those playgrounds. You all remember those playgrounds. They're disappearing from this earth. It also requires a playground where a bunch of adults can show up at night and have the police not called on them. Fun fact, I was almost arrested by the police the last time I played this game. Vampire Tag is a social sport that is shockingly fun, and it saddens me how few people will be able to play this. Someone's a vampire, everyone else is a human, nobody knows who's who, the vampire obviously knows who they are, and someone has hidden foam crosses and foam stakes around this thing in the dark, and you just start walking around, and the vampire taps you on the shoulder, they whisper into your ear, guess what, you're a vampire now. If you stake a vampire, they turn into a human again. If you touch the ground, that's lava, you're dead. This game is so elegantly designed. I think we played it every week for years when I was in college, and it's disappearing. So if you ever see a playground like that, and you think you can get about 12 of your friends to show up at night, Google around. There is like one website left that even explains the rules to this game. Make some foam stakes and play it. You'll have a way better time than you have any right to. A new game on the list. Oh, I hear some people reacting. This game's not for kids. I didn't even notice this game until I saw a few of my friends whose tastes I trust kept popping up on Steam playing this game, and the number of hours they had played it was going up and up and up. All I'm going to say about this game is that it is not what it appears to be, which I guess, obviously, you are on a path in the woods. At the end of this path, there is a cabin, and in this cabin, there is a princess. You must slay this princess, or else the world will end. That's it. That's the game. This game messed us up to the point that we gave an hour-long talk on an emerging art movement we're calling metacontextualism at MagFest. And this game is one of the seeds of that new art movement. I highly recommend you look up that talk. It's called Metacontext in Games. This is a Super Nintendo game released in the United States. This is real. It is called Aerobiz Supersonic because it is the sequel to a game called Aerobiz. This is a Super Nintendo game. It is also one of my favorite games where you are literally the CEO of an airline and you are literally calling board meetings. You are getting marketing updates. You are negotiating for slots at airports. You are setting prices. You are investing in hotels. You are worried about foreign relations. Oh no, the Olympics are happening in Brazil in 2015. What do I do about that? That's what this game is. It's not a computer game though. It's on a Super Nintendo with a controller. And yet, this game is actually a pretty good four-player competitive game. It plays out kind of like a board game. And again, if you play this game, you're either going to think I'm crazy or you're going to find out that you really like Ko Shibusawa games. There are a bunch of games like this on the Super Nintendo. They were stupidly popular in Japan. They were largely ignored in the United States. And I think the industry did a disservice to this type of game, these types of simulations. It is weirdly fun to be the CEO of an airline. Also, that guy is way good at his job. I'm not even kidding. These different people, all like, you'll start to figure out like which ones aren't great at their jobs, and you have to start like shuffling people around. And who do you send on the important missions, and who do you just send to waste some time for a while?
Sorry to ask, is this job training?
So, Ricochet. Has anyone here played Ricochet? Oh, we got a few people. All right. This is a mod for Half-Life. This is an old game. This mod is free. It's really simple. It's kind of like that disc throwing game from Tron. So you get a bunch of people in a server, and all you can do is throw discs or walk around these platforms. If you touch those little triangles, you'll jump to the next platform. It is like the dumbest, simplest baby mod. And yet, this game is deeply competitive. This game had a deep scene when it was popular. It is still played to this day. You can find servers about it. And somehow, despite this game being so great and being so unique, no one has ever made another game like it. There's never been like a Ricochet 2. I haven't even found anyone who made something that's even remotely like Ricochet, even if they've never heard of it. So I'm saying, if any of you out there are making games, I'd suggest play Ricochet, see what's fun about it, and then just make Ricochet, because clearly no one else is, and you'll be the first one, and you can say you're a genius. Now, I got to talk about a tabletop game. So I play a lot of board games, study board games. Board games usually don't last that many plays if your friends are smart, and you are smart, and you try to win them. Settlers lasts a while, but eventually, I've played Settlers enough. I think I can play it perfectly. I've played in the qualifiers before. If you've ever seen what the pros look like in like the final rounds of the Settlers Championships, the game's actually really sad. No one trades, no one talks, the dice are the only thing that matters. But most tabletop games will not survive more than 4 or 5 plays among people who are seriously trying to win. You will figure out what's broken about them, you'll figure out the degenerate strategy, you'll figure out it's random. It is very rare to find a board game that survives repeat play. Our group of what I would consider pros, have been playing this game for a very long time. I've easily played this game more than 100 times, and it is much like games like chess or Go. I'm not saying it is on the scale of chess or Go. That's a talk for another time. This game, because of the nature of how it's designed and the nature of how the 4 players interact, it is that deep, and your group could play this for the rest of your lives and never find a full degenerate strategy. You'll still be learning new things about this game. So if you want to have the experience of going from nothing to becoming a chess master, but you don't want it to literally take your entire life, and you want to play a game that feels extremely serious and extremely difficult with your friends, this game is the one I would recommend. It also is very abstract, so it feels like an old game. There's some gravitas to it. This might be one of the best tabletop games ever designed, in my opinion. We got a machine here. There used to be these things, you might not have heard of, they were called arcades. They used to be everywhere in the United States. And Dance Dance Revolution, when I was in college, invaded the United States and appeared in every arcade. The Wildwood Boardwalk in New Jersey used to be filled with DDR machines, like more than 20. I am not exaggerating. That is our group, that is me. We would just play DDR every day when we were out there, all night long. Dance Dance Revolution, there's a lot of rhythm games. They're all good in different ways. But Dance Dance Revolution, I'm not necessarily saying it's the best one, but it has some of the best design of rhythm games. Because some rhythm games end up just being type fast on a weird keyboard. Like, a lot of them are that. That's fine, I'm not saying that's bad. Dance Dance Revolution forces you to start to dance a little bit. It is not going to teach you how to dance. Do not do that in the club, but you will be forced to move. This game is fantastic exercise, and there's a bunch of attributes of its design I won't have time to get into. It is almost perfectly designed. There are subtle things the arrows are doing to help you keep time that your conscious brain won't even realize. This game has done things that rhythm games since never figured out. No one's played Battle Balls. Battle Balls, I think there's like 20 people who ever played this game in the United States and cared about it. We played it a lot in college because we're weird. You know that game that you and your friends get really overly serious about, and to the point that you're all really good at it and no one else has heard of it? So as a result, you can only ever play with your friends who are already good at it. The same thing happens, how many of you played Street Fighter to the point that no one will play Street Fighter with you anymore? Yeah, you're better than all your friends, but you're not good enough to go pro, so there's nobody for you. I think there's something to be said about the less popular games, or the games that become that for a very small group, or a very small culture, a local school, a family, and for our group, it was this game called Battle Balls. It's just a simple, I mean, you can imagine what's going on here. You're dropping balls down, the colors match. It does the typical kind of thing. The deal with this game is that it looks simple. It looks simpler than games like Tetris and all these other games that people will play competitively. It has surprising depth to the point that among our friends, the people who are good at it, if any of you played against them, you would do nothing. You would lose the game so fast you wouldn't even understand what happened. If I played against any of you, that would also happen to you. But if I played against them, it would happen to me. This game has such a high skill cap for how simple it is that we still haven't fully interrogated like exactly why that is. And we haven't found other games that quite have the same swinginess. So I'd recommend finding Senku or Battle Balls and giving it a try. And if you think it feels simple, I promise you, you're missing something. And if you figure out what you're missing, let me know, because I'm not actually that good at this game. All right, this is also down here.
I know
This game, every version of this game is brilliant for two reasons. One, it deeply supports the old arcade ethos of having a local leaderboard, having people who see each other at the arcade and fight against each other regularly. They eventually added, you could have your little driver's license and bring your own car with you every time. But two, this game has a single player mode, like a story. And it's like a full-on RPG. You are these Initial D characters. It is amazing. The sad part is it's very hard for people to play that amazing single-player story, because if you sit down at one of these machines, there will instantly be someone standing behind you who wants to take their turn playing the game or wants to fight you. So I don't think many people in the US have played the story on these games. They're also fantastically designed racing games in that they feel a lot like the good parts of, say, Ridge Racer, the early Ridge Racers. They're not realistic car racing, they're fun car racing.
Yo!
This got re-released recently on the Switch, and I highly recommend you buy it. There's a bunch of iterations of these games. Many of them were never released in the US. The last one they released was called Days of Ruin. It's a somewhat different, more serious game. But the first two Advance Wars, as far as the American audience are concerned, are some of the best designed single-player war games ever. They have a good multiplayer mode. No, I don't care about that. That's not relevant here. The single-player campaigns are so well designed, they are like a case study in careful design of a gaming experience. Every single unit, every single mountain, every detail of every single-player part of this game is so beautifully crafted that they're kind of masterpieces. That's why they didn't make a lot more of them. It cost so much to make these games that they could not make money continuing to make them because of the sheer number of hours of expert game design it required to make them. So I don't think there will be more Advance Wars games. If there are, it would be a miracle. So thus, I would say, get that Nintendo Switch Advance Wars and play through these campaigns. And when the game says, do you want to play classic mode or little baby mode? I highly recommend classic mode, because that design is only in the original game. The reason they frame it that way, these games are very hard, at least to start. But the beauty of the design, they teach you to be better at them without you realizing it, and they reward you for figuring stuff out emergently as opposed to directly mechanically. Sumer, I don't think no one here has played Sumer, have you? All right, Sumer is, one moment, my battery popped out of this thing. This thing's so old, it's missing its bottom. Sumer is a German board game, tabletop game, effectively. It is a worker placement game. You know, like Agricola or Lords of Waterdeep. You place workers out on the board and they do stuff for you. Except it's on the console. You can buy this game and like play it on your Switch or whatever. You can buy it on Steam. And it's a real-time game. Imagine playing a worker placement board game, but it is a real-time race to put your workers on the board. You gotta think fast. There's nothing else like it. This game hurts to play. It makes you feel stupid. It makes you feel paralyzed. It adds a level of intensity to a tabletop experience that I've never experienced elsewhere. I was one of the playtesters for this as well. This game doesn't mess around, and I highly recommend it, especially if you like tabletop games. But I will warn you, if you get stressed out by being under pressure in a game, I do not recommend this game. My friends who are very good at games, who can't handle, say, first-person shooters or real-time strategy games, cannot play this game. You've got to be good at real-time strategy and good at board games. All right, back to a classic. So the panel tomorrow, I'll be talking about how all games are kind of the same game. And we're going to be talking a little bit about genres, like what is a deck builder? What is a Metroidvania? The fact that I can say the word Metroidvania, and most of you know what that means, is because of this game and Symphony of the Night. So if you like Metroidvania games, you know, a genre that came from nothing and is named after 2 games, you should play both of the games that cause that genre to happen, because this is the other half of Symphony of the Night. This is an important element. The way this game guides you through its story, the way it causes you to explore, the quality of life improvements over NES Metroid, which is impossible unless you're insane. That game is really hard. As someone who tried to play it as a kid, renting it from Blockbuster, I don't think those words meant anything to most of you. But Super Metroid holds up today. Find an emulator and just play it. This game's pretty amazing. And you'll start to see where the modern Metroidvania genre came from and what its original manifestation was. I think this was more important to that genre than Symphony of the Night was. This is the game I am good at. That's why it's stuck in my craw. I am undefeated at Rampart Arcade, and I have played this game a lot in my life. If there was a Rampart arcade machine within 10 miles of here, I would give anyone $1,000 who could beat me. I swear. But Rampart, if you've never played it, you can get different iterations of Arcade Rampart. There's a bunch of packs that were sold for like the GameCube. I'm sure there's online versions. It's on a bunch of consoles. But Arcade Rampart is a really interesting competitive game, and there haven't been other games like it because it combines Tetris with sort of an area control game. You are literally, I don't know why that keeps blinking. I have no control over that. You literally build a castle and put cannons in it, and your opponent builds a castle and puts cannons in it, and your goal is to mess up the walls so that in the next round, when now everyone's playing a weird Tetris to try to build more walls and surround more castles, if your opponent fails to surround at least one castle, they die and you win. So you are playing this weird hybrid of Tetris, cannons, and area control in a really tight, well-designed competitive game. This game also is notable in that if you can find an arcade machine, they are increasingly rare. You get an added bonus. It is controlled with the trackball. This feels so good until it pulls part of your finger into it, and then the blood comes out. All right, there's tabletop board games, but there are also tabletop sports. Jungle Speed is in the tabletop library. You can go downstairs and play it, and I highly recommend you do. This is a real-time game. You're flipping over these cards, and you're sitting in a circle. You ever played Spoons in high school? It's kind of like that. When the thing happens, it basically causes you and another player to have a duel. Whoever grabs that totem first wins the points. And the reason I call out this game is because of this post from our forum. Three notable things about that. One, this post is from October of 2006. 2, someone broke their finger playing Jungle Speed. And 3, that person is Jason Morningstar, the famous indie RPG game designer. Jungle Speed is really good, and it is a really good sport. But sports do have an inherent bit of danger, and I have other friends who have hurt themselves playing this game. So play it, but be careful about it, and if you hurt yourselves playing this, don't blame Zenkaikon. All right, there's a lot of WarioWare games. They're all single player, they're fun for what they are. But on the GameCube, they released WarioWare Incorporated. It was different from all the other ones. It had a multiplayer mode, and that multiplayer mode is both good and serious. You can be good at the WarioWare multiplayer in WarioWare Incorporated. Think about all the fun you have playing the mini games in like a Mario Party. Distill that and then distill it again into its core refined essence. And that is the multiplayer mode of WarioWare Incorporated. This is a game that came out in the era where you would have plug 4 Game Boys into a GameCube to play Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles and this. However, you don't actually need the Game Boys for this. That was kind of a cheat on Nintendo's part. It just let you use the Game Boy controller because people were used to that for WarioWare. It didn't do anything else. Didn't use the screen for anything. You can just use regular GameCube controllers. This game is dangerously fun, and there's still nothing else like it except in the weird indie spaces. I was at MagFest. I don't know what the game was called. Someone made like a really hacked together, weird looking MS Paint art game that they had in an installation at MagFest. Like, this is a bespoke game. There's one copy of it. And it was basically WarioWare, but with their own like OCs in it and a bunch of inside jokes I didn't get. And that's the first time I've seen anyone take the good part of WarioWare and remake it in a different format. Nintendo seems to just want to make more single-player WarioWares, and the Wii one we'll never talk about again. This game is worth finding and playing with your friends. All right, so Tribes 2. Tribes 2 is very hard to play today. Possibly impossible, as I talked about in the panel yesterday. But what was unique about Tribes 2 is that this was the first-person shooter. Tribes 1 had this to a degree. The Tribes is after it, they had issues. But Tribes 2 was this weird map where you'd have big maps, you'd have like 20 or 30 people on each team playing a first-person shooter. And on one hand, it had really good weapons for serious competitive play. Like, you had to be good at first-person shooters, and sometimes players would sort of get off into the corner of a map, basically having a duel to the death, and then the winner goes on to do whatever else they're going to do in the map. But you also had a base. You were building turrets and defending the base. You were trying to play capture the flag. And in your base, inside the base, down corridors and like in a basement was the flag. So you'd have people in your base like trying to defend this flag. You'd have people outside building turrets and structures and manning guns and trying to defend it. You could build fighter jets and bombers and send like armies against the other base. And this was all a real-time game that ended in about a half hour. The scale of this game was noteworthy. And when it came out, it kind of took the entire world by storm. This was in the 2000s. Pretty much, like, people could not get copies of this game. It was sold out everywhere. It became one of the most popular PC games ever at that time. And then bit by bit, the servers stopped working, and the game basically disappeared within a couple years. Not because no one wanted to play it, because the game didn't work anymore. I don't know if you can play this one, but it's worth learning the story of this game, because it did something else that predates a lot of systems we know today. You might know Steam, or Valve Steam. You know what that was originally made for? You know what Steam was? It was a application you would download for the sole purpose of applying patches to Counter-Strike. That's the only reason we got it, so we could patch Counter-Strike. That's what it was for. All that other stuff came later. But in that same era, Tribes 2 had email inside of it. You could email other players within the game. It had message boards inside of it. It supported teams and clans and competitive play. It did all the stuff that modern FPSs have done and the things that the modern internet is doing, entirely confined within this game. And it kind of worked. Because you have to understand, when this game was out, I was in college. Do you know how I accessed my email when this game was popular? I would use something that's not in Windows anymore called Telnet. I would Telnet to the IP address of the Unix cluster that my university ran, and I would access my email using applications like Pine or Elm. That is the world that this game existed in. This was ahead of its time in so many different ways. Train games. Train people are weird. I'm a train person. There's two kinds of train people, but they share some significant characteristics. Shared characteristics. They often are very large and jolly and have suspenders and have a unique Santa beard. The longer it is, the more powerful they are. They tend to be sitting either in the back corner of the hobby shop or the back corner of the game store, and they're doing one of two things. They are either building model trains or they're playing 18xx games. You might hear, do any of you play train games? Any of you know what I'm talking about here? Okay, so I gotta share with you what this world is like. These games are kind of insane. Like this 1846 might be the simplest one that I've played. These games take 4 to 40 hours, depending on who you're playing with. They are extremely complex. They are really dense. You're like buying and selling stock. But the people who are into these games are like a part of the gaming world that doesn't connect with a lot of the other parts of the gaming world. Like they are by themselves with their own culture. I recommend you try one of these games. I want you to see what these games are like. Because if you ever hear about a train game and someone says Ticket to Ride, that's not a train game. That's just a card game with a train theme. These are train games, but they're also relevant. You know what these games are actually about? Building these tracks and like running the train company, that's secondary. That just happens along the way. You play rich people. You start with money, and you know what you want? More money. So what do? Crime. These games are about financial crime. What you're actually doing is IPOing train companies and then bilking the investors. You buy 3 different companies, and then you have your good company corruptly buy all the assets of your crappy companies for cheap, and then you dump the stock on the market and screw your friend. These games explore what happens when capitalism is unreined. Why we have had regulations, of course, in America. These games are not what they look like. They are also really good, fun games. However, I don't recommend playing them the way the old train people play them with physical pieces, because these games can take 4 hours. They're really complex. You're literally having to calculate the dividends on the stock and figuring out who shorted things and what the interest rate is in the market. There's a website, 18xx.games. I will say, me and my friends, now we're pros. We have a whole talk we give at Penny Arcade Expos occasionally called Take Your Effing Turn, where we talk about how to be fast at games. We play games fast. I do not tolerate slow games. It takes our group to play an entire game of 1846, the Race for the Midwest, on 18xx.games, which is a free website, maybe 20 minutes, maybe a half hour. It only takes 4 hours because either people are really slow and not good at math, or those physical bits just take a lot of effort to manipulate, and the game handles it all. You click a button, you find out your dividends. So I'd recommend read the rules to 1846, the Race for the Midwest. You're not going to understand them. Then find a video somewhere where someone explains how the hell to play this game. You'll partly understand it. Then find someone who has played one of these games and play it with them on 18xx.games. I promise you have never played a game like this before. I don't know if you'll like it. A lot of people do not like these games. They are extremely mean. You can lose the game in the first round if your friends are that cruel. So the best way to enjoy these games, they illustrate another thing about game design. You ever want to teach a friend a game like, hey, I'm a Street Fighter fan, would you like to learn how to play Street Fighter? And then you just absolutely destroy them, and then for some reason they don't want to play with you anymore? These games have a culture where the people who like them will play games of them with their friends to try to get them to play these games, but instead of just crushing them, they will lose on purpose or even just make interesting decisions to let the other players experience the crazy things that can happen in these games. These are games where you might literally, at the start of your turn, sell all your stock, and now your friend suddenly owns your garbage train company that's about to go into bankruptcy and is literally kicked out of the game. Pro players, it's hard to do that too, because I'll see it coming a mile away. But if I'm teaching you how to play, I might set that up to make sure it's gonna happen, because it'll be really funny. All right, Quake 2, there were death matches before Quake 2. I was connecting null modems together in 486s to play Doom multiplayer. I had a 2600 baud modem. Does anyone know what the word baud means? So we would play Doom deathmatch, like multiplayer fighting, over phone lines. Quake 1 came out. It had a pretty thriving community, but I would say Quake 2 was the point where that genre evolved into what we know today. This was when it actually got good. I'm not saying Quake 1 deathmatch was bad. I'm just saying that it was an early form of an emerging art form. Because remember, video games, the concept of a video game, were invented in living memory. There are people at this convention who were alive when the first video game was ever made. So this is like growing up during the era of cinema when the first films were being made. So games are evolving very rapidly. Quake 1 did not come out that long before Quake 2, and yet Quake 2 was sort of this inflection point. Right around the time Quake 2 came out is when computing power in home PCs got to the level to unlock like a multiplicative explosion of cool games and cool game ideas and good game design. Some of the most important and foundational games in the history of video games came out right around this time, and Quake 2 Deathmatch is one of them. id has been maintaining Quake 2. They released patches recently for this game. If you own Quake on Steam, you can just play Deathmatch with other people. It all just works. That's amazing. If you have never actually played Quake 2 Deathmatch, I recommend you do it because you will see the core aspects of it really not different from any modern game. But this game does some things that these more modern games don't do, and there's a lot you can learn from this. All right. This game is good for two reasons. One, it has the best, worst, fantastic, awful art I've ever seen. And two, I'm from Michigan. You know, I'm a New Yorker now. Like, I'm really struggling to not say the F word a lot because, you know, New York, that's just how we are. But I grew up in Detroit, in Michigan. And the Midwest is known for a bunch of things like pasties and snow and trick-taking games. Like, I was taught hardcore trick-taking games when I was single-digit age. And my dad wouldn't let me win. I'd get good. So trick-taking games like Hearts and Euchre, Spades, all the games that you see old ladies playing like over brunch. These games are phenomenal. And when we used to give talks about a decade ago, they were largely ignored by the gaming world, except among people who grew up in the Midwest or were serious about games and studied them. But over the last decade, trick-taking has had this big resurgence. There are tons of new trick-taking games that have been released in the past decade, and they're all great because trick-taking is one of those core mechanics of games that is really versatile and can be used in a lot of contexts. So if you've never played a trick-taking game, I think Wizard is the one you want to play because Wizard is very simple. You're going to deal everyone a hand of one card. Everyone's going to look at that one card. Then they're going to decide, how many tricks am I going to take? How many of the hands we're about to play am I going to win out of the one hand? And you either bid, I'll win this one, I won't win this one. Sometimes two people say they're going to win it. Now that's going to be funny. Then you score, then you play again, but now everyone gets 2 cards. Then you play again, but everyone gets 3 cards. Then you play again, everyone gets 4 cards. This game also, though, it incorporates most of the core elements of trick-taking games. If you talk to a trick-taking person and they want to describe a game, I'd say, oh yeah, this is a no partnership bidding game with Trump, the card playing kind, not the bad kind, and some special cards. So if you play this game, it's going to teach you all the core elements of trick-taking games. Then you'll be able to learn any other trick-taking game in the world almost instantly because you'll have learned the basis of trick-taking. And these games are all great, like Hearts. Have you ever played Hearts on a Windows computer? It's a really good game. I used to make a lot of money playing that game in high school with friends.
Wow.
All right, so I grew up in an era where if you wanted to role play online, you either had to dial your physical phone into a party line while you were connected to something, type a lot of words into a bulletin board system of some kind, or log into a MUD. There are still MUDs today. You should try out a MUD, a multi-user dungeon, or a muck, or a mush. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are old person words that mean almost nothing in the modern era. These were some of the earliest, deep online role-playing experiences that existed. These are the foundation of most role-playing games that you might encounter today. This is where people's OCs would interact before we had the term OC. When you only have text, it kind of forces you, 1, to be a much faster typer, and 2, to be able to become almost an author, to describe your character, to describe what's happening. Imagine just hanging out in a chat room and collectively writing a novel together. That's kind of how some of these MUDs were. The ones that weren't like that were more competitive, that had more game mechanics in them, well, that's where Rogue came from. That's where roguelikes came from. We'll talk a lot about roguelikes if you come to my talk tomorrow. I recommend poking at least one MUD out there. The people who maintain the MUDs that still exist today are very passionate about maintaining this memory. So treat it like a museum And again, you're going to have to learn some fussy stuff to make it work. There are some applications, some emulators, some things that make this easier than you might expect, but there are still some mods where you get a Linux computer and telnet to a port and start typing. All right, there is a Nidhogg 2. Nidhogg 1, however, I think gets some points for this extremely abstract style. These are very clearly two fencers who are about to fight to the death. This game is so pure. So think about Outlaw from the very beginning of this talk, a very early example of a competitive, symmetric esport. This is almost like the final evolution of Outlaw. This is an extremely high skill cap game. All you're doing, you're trying to get to the other side of the map. Yellow is trying to get all the way to the side. If they get through all the screens, they win. Orange trying to get all the way to that side. If they get all the way to the end, all the screens, they win. If you kill someone, you get priority. Once you have priority, you don't care about fighting anymore. Your only goal is to get past them. It's a lot like ice hockey in that regard. This is almost like possession of the puck. Spoilers for the talk tomorrow. We can talk a lot about ice hockey in that talk. This game is basically dead because it's very old and Nidhogg 2 came out. Nidhogg 2 is not as good as Nidhogg 1 because it's no longer perfectly symmetrical. In my opinion, it is a worse game. This, I think, was a better designed path. However, Nidhogg's still running. And if you have it on Steam, you can get this game real cheap. If you go into multiplayer matchmaking, if there's anyone else in the world trying to play this game, you'll immediately fight them. And every now and then there's someone hanging out in there. I recommend, if nothing else for that weird experience, get a copy of this game, play it with your friends at a party, like with 2 controllers, and I guarantee you'll have a good time. If you play this at a party with friends, you prove to me you did it and you didn't have a good time, email me, I will send you $5. But then, go into the multiplayer online and see if anyone's in there. Because there's a chance, if any of you take my advice, some of you might be in there together. This game is brilliant for so many ways I can't even get into because I gotta make sure I have time to get through the rest. This got re-released recently. There are 2 different Dune games. I'm not talking about the worker placement one, I'm talking about the weirdo one. Dune is an old game because it's an old book. Has anyone here read Dune? No, how have you seen the movie Dune? All right, a lot more people. That tends to be how it goes.
Good one, bad one.
You know what? The answer to good one or bad one could go either way. I like both Dune movies. But Dune does a bunch of stuff. It kind of breaks the rules of game design in a way that very few game designers are brave enough to do, and it works. I'm going to share a few things that this game does. You don't need to know the rules, but you'll see how crazy this is in a second. In this game, you choose what faction you are. Someone's the Harkonnen. Someone is House Atreides. Someone is the Old Witch Ladies. Like, everyone chooses their faction. If you read the powers of the factions, like if you read one power, they are overpowered. They are broken. They are insane. Even not knowing the rules, here's what the Harkonnens' powers are. This game has 2 card decks, the Spice deck and the Treachery deck. Very, very apropos to Dune, the 2 things that happened in that novel. Treachery cards are extremely powerful. That's where you can get like a nuke or a laser gun. These cards can swing the game. Any given player can only have 4 of them at a time. If you're the Harkonnen, you can have 8. If you're the Harkonnen, you can just get more of them along the way too. Every time you buy one, you can just get another one. You have mechanics for betraying other players just openly and nakedly. What's another good example? The Witch Ladies. Do you know what their power is? Before the game, after everyone's chosen their characters and set everything up, they're going to write down on a piece of paper the name of another player and a turn. If that player wins the game on that turn, they don't win. You win. You win. Every faction is so overpowered. If you read the rules, you will think, this couldn't work. This is ridiculous. Of course I want to be the Harkonnen. And then you read the Bene Gesserit and you're like, wow, this is broken. Of course I want to be the Bene Gesserit. So instead of, a perfectly balanced fighting game, imagine a fighting game where everyone feels like M. Bison from the original Street Fighter 2. The other thing this game does, you can form alliances. This game, there's a thing that'll happen where you win if you control like a majority of the cities. Whenever the worm comes out, the game pauses, and you can just decide if you want to form alliances. These alliances are binding until the next time the worm comes out. Once you form an alliance, if your alliance wins, all of you win, all the other players lose, that's it. And there are no limits or rules on who is in an alliance. You could all 6 players could just be like, you know what? Yeah, we're all in alliance. We all win. And I guarantee you will never do that. Every time I've played this game, every time I've seen someone play this game, everyone's like, well, why don't we just all form an alliance, all of us except Scott, and then we all win and Scott loses. And you're like this. Sometimes that happens, but usually then someone else will say, but do we really need Pete? I bet we can win without Pete. And then Pete and Scott are like, well, we're not going to let you win, so we're going to form an alliance. Sometimes 3 alliances form. There aren't many games that do alliances well. Either they don't include them and you just do it anyway, like Risk, in which case, pro tip, if anyone makes an alliance with you in Risk, assume they're going to break it, so break it before they break it. Or games have formal alliances, but they're often really boring games where the alliances don't do much. This is a game where the alliances are literally, we're all just going to win together, F you. Gravity Bone. So I like to talk a lot about how, I hate that this battery keeps popping out. Games, there's this thing you see mostly among bad faith people who have bad ideas who will try to say that some games aren't games. They'll pejoratively call a game a walking simulator or a talking simulator. I want to point out that the organization that governs gaming, that shepherds gaming in the global industry, is called the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association. Because games, lots of things are games. So when we talk about video games, it's really helpful to call them all entertainment software. It is software that entertains you in an interactive way. Gravity Bone is a really, really short game with really, really simple graphics. It is very cheap to get on Steam. And it's kind of just a movie that you play through. You're a spy, you get a mission. You're a spy, you get another mission. Something goes wrong, there's a crazy chase scene. And this game does something that I've seen in only a few other games. Half-Life 2 did it in a few points. Portal did it. Not many games do it. The game has basically cutscenes, but they're not really cutscenes. You're playing the game, and the game has guided you to make choices that cause you to play out what effectively feels like a cutscene. Everything is super cinematic because the game has guided you that way, but the game didn't force you. You'll play the game and you'll wonder, how did that work? It worked because you were tricked by the game into doing exactly what the game wanted you to do. This game takes maybe 20 minutes to play. It is a profound experience, and if you play it, I want you to think very hard about what the game was tricking you into doing and how it got you to do the things you did along the way. So, speaking of card games, solitaire is fun, right? What if you made it versus, cutthroat, and real time? Nerds is a game you can play physically. There's enough cards down in tabletop to where you could set this up on a table and play it. Playing this game in person is possible. It is chaotic. You might hurt yourself. So I'd recommend trying out Nerds Online. You can just buy this on Steam. In fact, I think it's free on Steam. Basically, it is just a shared area with a bunch of decks of cards, and you're all playing solitaire simultaneously, but it's a version of solitaire where you're playing solitaire rules, but your goal is to get all these cards out of your board into the middle. But you're doing it in a shared way. 100% of the time, you're going to see a spot, you can put that 2, and you're dragging your card up there, and then someone else beats you to it. But the magic of this game, it shows you where everyone's mouse cursor is in real time. You see all the mouse cursors. If someone's dragging a card, you see all the cards. And that might not sound like a lot. That might not sound like it's that important. From a game design perspective, that changes everything. This game is so intense. It is difficult to have a conversation or even say words while you're playing this game. It goes so hard. It goes so fast. And then when you finish, you'll find you were holding your breath sometimes. It also has a skill cap so high that I am garbage at this game. I don't think I've ever won it. It is so hard against people who are good at solitaire. But yeah, you could play this in person, but I'd recommend at least learn online first. That way, if you break your finger, at least it was worth it. Oh, wow. All right. So in ancient times, on computers, You'd be at your school, and they'd have some computers, and there'd be kids who would pass around floppy disks. And those floppy disks would have a few games on them. Usually there were 3 games that were most common, at least in the eastern side of the United States. You'd see Stunts 4D Racing, usually with a little logo that popped up that said Cracked by Killfit, because Killfit was this organization that allowed this game to be played without paying for it, shall we say. Also on that disc was usually a game called LHX, which was a helicopter simulator that ran on the 386. And the third game that was usually on those discs was Scorched Earth. You know Worms? Worms is just based on Scorched Earth. Scorched Earth is just better in every possible way. Scorched Earth is serious and competitive, but it's just little tanks, and you pick your how hard you're going to shoot, what angle you're going to shoot, and what weapon you're going to use, and you shoot it, and you take turns. This game is not only really fun, but there was a deep culture around this in the pre-internet era. There were competitive leaderboards in every little town in that era. This game holds up and is really fun as a party game. And you can get copies of it. It is widely available. I highly recommend you check it out. But also, when you play it, when you think about something, think about the games you like today. And when you play this, it feels ancient, because it is. And yet, this game was wildly popular in its era. For some reason, humans like to play games to the point that we will play a game that looks and acts like this, and it'll be the center of our universe until something better comes along. So the 3 things humans like to do: we make music, we play games, and we tell stories. Unless fascists come in and ruin everything, or we run out of money, or we run out of food. But as long as we have money and food and a place to sleep, those are the 3 things humans do. And I want you to think about that as you play a game as simple as this, because this is early video gaming. This is where everything came from. Dating games. There are perverted dating games. No, we're not talking about those. Dating games have a long history. I don't think everyone really knows where dating games came from, because dating games largely, as you know them today, all came from the Tokimeki series. And the early Tokimeki games, if I had to describe to someone what these games are, I'd say they're high school simulators. Most of this game is deciding, all right, it's Tuesday. Do I actually go to school, or do I cut class? All right, I'm in school. Do I try hard in class, or do I doodle at my desk? All right, that girl wants to talk to me. Do I talk to her, or do I talk to my friend? After school, do I do my homework, or do I go out? Every week, you go on a date on Sunday, unless no one answers your question, and then you're alone. Maybe you should stay home and study because there's an exam. This game is a stat builder simulator of high school. The dating part is like at the very edge of this game. And I don't think enough people realize that. So I'd recommend actually playing the translated version of Tokimeki Memorial, because this is probably the most fun one. And if you play other dating games, like especially from this era in the 90s, they can serve the same purpose. However, they might do something perverted or sketchy that you really don't want to engage with. There's a lot of reasons I don't really want to get into that some dating games are not, let's say, appropriate for all audiences. Nothing unwholesome happens in Tokimeki Memorial. We used to, in college, play a translated version of this game semi-seriously and competitively around a couch. But that's a story for another time. All right. So the first talk I ever gave at a Penny Arcade Expo in the year 2008 was called Beyond Dungeons & Dragons, where we basically spent 55 minutes taking a crap all over D&D. And I say that as someone who has played Dungeons & Dragons my entire life. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons since first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I've also played Dungeons & Dragons, you know, the old rules cyclopedia. I played more second ed D&D than any other RPG combined. I love Dungeons & Dragons. But Dungeons & Dragons is broadly bad game design for the things you're all trying to use it for. It's really good. Now, 5th edition, current D&D is better at this, but many of these problems still apply. Dungeons & Dragons still has this combat focus. The answer to a problem is often a sword. If you're looking at a game's mechanics and the game says, oh, if you want to have an argument with that guy to get into the secret vault, roll 1d6 or 1d10 or 1d20 or 2d100 or whatever, and we'll find out and you move on. But if you want to fight that guy, you get to roll dice for like an hour. We're going to play a whole game about fighting that guy. So I loved D&D until one day I went to a convention. And at the convention, I played a game called Burning Wheel. There's this guy, and he was sitting at a table, and he was like, you want to play my game? It's not D&D. And I didn't want anything to do with this. Because we all know that friend who tries to make D&D better. They never make it better. But this guy was really insistent, so I sat down and played this game, and it blew my mind. It was called Burning Wheel. Indie role-playing games are doing the things that you all actually want D&D to do. If you want to play a hack and slash mechanical heavy game, then D&D is great. But if you're trying to tell a story, there are better games that will do that better. One example, Blades in the Dark. Oh, I see a lot of nods. Blades in the Dark. You want to play a game where you're in a fantasy world and you're doing heists? Well, that is a game that is mechanically designed around you're a gang doing heists in a fantasy world. It has mechanics like, instead of planning the heist, you ever play a D&D session where you spend a lot of time trying to plan your dungeon crawl? Imagine you're already in the dungeon and you have a mechanic where you can say, you know what? I sent my familiar in here last night and left a sword behind that altar. You can make up flashbacks now to things you did in the past to affect the game now. That's a mechanic. So you can move forward with the story, skip to the interesting part. Burning Wheel is another great example. In Burning Wheel, that is a system where you don't level up. It's not like, oh, I got a bunch of XP, now I'm level 12 and I get a bunch of cool things. If you want to use your sword to do something, you might succeed or you might fail. But if you have a fight with someone, you're not going to roll 1,000 dice. You're going to roll once. How'd that fight go? And it probably didn't go well. If you lose a fight, you're bleeding. You might die. Your character might be gone. They are wounded. They are maimed. The story always moves forward radically. Anytime someone picks up dice in a game like Burning Wheel, everybody pauses because any die roll is going to radically and irrevocably alter your characters and alter the story. I'd say 90% of the die rolls in D&D don't actually matter because the game master is going to tell you the same story anyway. These are games where in D&D, often, if there's something behind a door and the game master wants you to see what's behind the door, they're not going to super stand in your way. You try to pick a lock and you fail. What do you do in Baldur's Gate 3? You have a stereo and try to pick the lock again. In Burning Wheel, if you try to pick the lock and you fail, the answer is, you failed to pick this lock and now there are consequences of that and the story is different. The answer might be, oh yeah, the door opens. You did successfully pick the lock, but because you failed in the roll, there's guards in that room. Now you're screwed. There's a game called Inspectors where the rules are anytime the players roll well, they narrate what happens next. Anytime the players roll poorly, the game master narrates what happens next, and it's never good.
Oh, no.
Think about all the storytelling you want to do in D&D where you're the ones having to do the work because the system is not giving you a ton of support. These are games that give you that support. These are games that make people who are bad at acting, bad at writing, bad at storytelling, tell great stories with their friends and make collaborative fiction. It doesn't even matter which one. Pick any indie RPG. I picked Lady Blackbird because it's free. You go to that QR code, you can just download this game, just PDFs, trivial to run. The story's already set, the characters are set. We could print this out, sit down right now, I could run it for all of you, you'd have a great time. So that game is basically Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is basically the final evolution of these Quest for Glory games. You think about those old King's Quest, all the point and click adventures from the Sierra era. Most people focus on the ones that were puzzles. Police quests, King's Quest, the Scum games, all those games. The Quest for Glory games were actually very different, even though they looked similar. These games are a lot more like Baldur's Gate 3. These games were more, you had stats. You're still doing a point and click adventure, but the core of these games was that you would pick a different kind of class. You could be a fighter, you could be a mage, you could be a whatever, and the game would be different depending on what you picked, and every challenge in the game could be approached almost any way, as opposed to, say, most point-and-click adventures where you have to pick the specific torch and use it on the specific wraith on the specific screen in order to move forward. These games were much more emergent, and these games, I swear, if you play this game even a little, you're going to be thinking, oh wow, he was right, this is just Baldur's Gate 3 from the late 80s. Weird. Dig Dug might be the best competitive arcade game ever made. A lot of games where there's world records or competitive scenes that are old arcade games, they're more tests of endurance. Skill is there. You've got to be good at Donkey Kong to get very far into Donkey Kong. But it's more a test of endurance because of how long it takes. The game doesn't get harder. Dig Dug is one of the rare arcade games from that era where it gets harder fast. you will hit the point where you cannot move any further. This game just keeps getting harder, and to get very far in this game, you have to build immense amounts of skill. And I think that was a shift that we're starting to see in modern games, where games moved away from do the same thing forever until you get bored and stop, to the game gets harder to the point that you cannot progress further. You found the limits of your skill. Not everyone likes that kind of thing. There's a lot of evidence that most people don't like games that tell them what their skill is. Think about people who are silver in Overwatch and how they act in public. I'm not trying to tell you air hockey exists. I'm trying to tell you, if there is an air hockey table anywhere near you, and you have some friends who are willing to play it with you, I want you to experience getting good at air hockey. We played air hockey a lot in college. You'll know someone's good. If someone's ever like, hey, you want to play air hockey? Friendly wager, $5. Watch how they hold that little puck. If they hold it like a normal person, yeah, you're fine. If they put 2 fingers in it, like off to the side, watch out. We did a show on air hockey on Geek Nights years and years and years ago. And professional air hockey people were like, oh, wow, you guys talked a big game. You want to come to our tournament? And we almost did. We just couldn't afford the flights at the time. But play air hockey to the point that you get good at it, because then you will see what air hockey really is. I don't think I need to belabor the point. People want to make games. Not everyone's a developer. Games like Mario Maker have caused a creative explosion that we have barely started to process as a society. Go look at the weird crap people are making in Mario Maker if you have not. It is amazing. So this is a Friedman-free board game with a theme that would cause most of you to ignore it. There's a market, and you want to have your fish cart closest to the fish market, so you have the freshest fish when you're selling fish to the people at Friedman Freese's Fresh Fish Market. Very like German kind of board game. This game has a really simple skin, and it looks pretty straightforward. This is possibly the most cutthroat board game I have ever played. This is a game where you'll know you understand game design if you start playing this game and you realize how it is actually about harming other people and has nothing to do with your fish. You will have ascended to a new plane of games. As long as you never give them money. Marvel Snap is basically based on a game that is in the tabletop library downstairs. It is called Battle Line. It's by Rainer Knizia. Play Battle Line, and then think about Marvel Snap, and you will realize they're in fact the same game. Bionic Commando, legendary game with legendary mechanics from the NES era. So legendary that when they made a new Bionic Commando, it failed. But they made a remake of the original as marketing material for that one, and it sold more than the new game they made. Bionic Commando Rearmed, there's no other game like it. You've got to play it. This game is a genre in and of itself. Mafia Werewolf, people going like this, and the real rules are not what you think they are. Play this game with the real rules. The real rules are the Mafia don't know who each other are, or the Mafia can't communicate during the night. They got to communicate during the day to figure out who they're going to kill. That gives you something to go on instead of just random social deduction. Action Castle, go read what this is. It's a role-playing game where someone is the game master running a text adventure for the group. Fast food franchise is Monopoly, but good. It takes about 20 minutes, but it feels just like Monopoly. And Disco Elysium, the last game on the list, honestly, is going to tell you that maybe we can live in a world without capitalism, and it's pretty right. I hope this was enjoyable.